This video will focus on the teaching of traditional literature under child and adolescent literature. Definition and description. Visual narratives on ancient cave paintings in Europe, Asia, and Australia indicate that prehistoric humans had stories to tell long before they had a written language. For thousands of years, the best of these stories were preserved through the art of storytelling from one generation to the next. Surely, these stories survived because people enjoyed hearing them. In folk literature, we have our most ancient stories and a priceless literary and cultural heritage that links us to our beginnings as thinking beings. Traditional literature is the body of ancient stories and poems that grew out of the oral tradition of storytelling before being eventually written down. Having no known or identifiable authors, these stories and poems are attributed to entire groups of people or cultures. Although some traditional stories are told as cultural or spiritual truths or may contain factual elements, most are considered fantasy. Because these stories have been preserved over time, they provide insights into the underlying values and beliefs of particular cultural groups and opportunities for comparisons across cultures. Most are considered imaginative stories that provide a window into human nature and cultural beliefs. These traditional stories also provide the basis for many works of modern literature and drama, and so children need a strong background in these stories to bring to their later literary experiences. Traditional literature includes several different types of stories, but because they were all shared orally for so long, they have many features in common. Plot. Plots are short, simple, and direct. All but the essentials disappear during countless retellings. Action. Action is concentrated and fast-paced, adding interest. Characters. Characters are two-dimensional and easily identified as good or bad. Setting. Settings are unimportant and vague. In the beginning or long ago in a land far away. Literary style. Literary style is characterized by standard beginnings and endings. Once upon a time, motifs, recurring features such as the number 3, and repeated refrains, mirror, mirror on the wall. Themes. Themes are limited. Example, good overcomes evil. The small and powerless overcome the powerful. Explanations for the ways of the world. Endings. Endings are almost always happy, and they lived happily ever after. Folklore is still being created, particularly in cultures and countries where oral tradition remains an important means of communication. In the United States, urban legends, jokes, and jump rope rhymes are all part of the constantly evolving body of modern folklore. Evaluation and selection. For thousands of years, people of all ages were the intended audience for traditional stories. In our scientifically enlightened times, these stories have been relegated to children because of their use of the supernatural and magic. The following list of evaluation criteria was developed with the general child audience in mind. A traditional tale, even though written down, should preserve the narrative or storytelling style and should sound as though it is being told. A traditional tale should preserve the flavor of the culture or country of its origin through the use of unusual speech patterns, a few foreign terms or proper names common to the culture. In illustrated versions, text and illustrations must be of high quality, and illustrations must match the tone of the text and help to capture the essence of the culture of origin. Traditional tales employ a simple but rich literary style. Even very young children are fascinated by the chants, stylistic flourishes, and colorful vocabulary that are characteristics of masterful storytelling. In evaluating collections of traditional literature, consider the number and variety of tales in the collection and the quality of reference aids such as tables of contents and indexes. Some adults raise concerns that the gruesome violence and sometimes found in traditional stories harm or traumatizes children. In recent times, many traditional stories have been rewritten to omit the violence, as in the Disney versions of folktales. In a softened version of Snow White, the evil stepmother is either forgiven by the heroine or banished from the kingdom. Earlier grim versions of the tale end with the stepmother dancing to her death in red-hot iron shoes. Critics of the softened versions of traditional tales claim that altering the stories robbed them of their power, their appeal, and their psychological benefit to children, who are reassured that the evil force is gone forever and cannot come back to hurt them. Children should also be made aware of the male chauvinism and poor feminine role models, from ever sinister stepmothers to ever helpless princesses, rampant in folk tales. Types of traditional literature. Classification of traditional literature can be confusing. For instance, not everyone uses the same terms when referring to certain types of traditional stories. Also, modern stories that were written by known authors in the style of the traditional ones but are not of ancient and unknown origin are therefore not traditional in the strict sense. The following terms are commonly used when referring to traditional literature. Traditional literature: the entire body of stories passed down from ancient times by the oral tradition. The term folk tales is sometimes used synonymously with traditional literature, but we see it as a subcategory. Retold tale: a version of a tale written in a style that will appeal to a contemporary audience but otherwise remaining true to the ancient tale. Variant: a story that shares elements of plot or character with other stories and is therefore in the same story family but differs mainly by culture. There are hundreds of variants of Cinderella, for example, from all over the world, that originated in the ancient past. Types of traditional literature. Myths. Myths are stories that recount and explain the origins of the world and the phenomena of nature. They are sometimes referred to as creation stories. The characters in these stories are mainly gods and goddesses, with occasional mention of humans, and the setting is high above earth in the home of the gods. Although often violent, myths nonetheless mirror human nature and the essence of our sometimes primitive emotions, instincts, and desires. Some folklorists believe that myths are the foundation of all other ancient stories. The best known mythology are of Greek, Roman, and Norse origin. The complexity and symbolism often found in the myths make them appropriate for an older audience, 9 years and up. Some myths have been simplified for a younger audience, but oversimplification robs these stories of their power and appeal. Epics. Epics are long stories of human adventure and heroism recounted in many episodes, sometimes in verse. Epics are grounded in mythology, and their characters can be both human and divine. However, the hero is always human or, in some cases, superhuman, as was Ulysses in Odyssey, Beowulf, and Roland in the Song of Roland. The setting is earthly but not always realistic. Because of their length and complexity, epics are perhaps more suitable for adolescents, but on the strength of their compelling characters and events, some epics have been successfully adopted and shortened for a younger audience. Legends and tall tales. Legends are stories based on either real or supposedly real individuals and their marvelous deeds. Legendary characters such as King Arthur and Robin Hood and legendary settings such as Camelot are a tantalizing mix of realism and fantasy. Although the feats of the heroes of legend defy belief today, in ancient times these stories were considered factual. Legends in general are austere in tone and because of their length, seriousness, and complexity are often suitable for middle graders. Tall tales are highly exaggerated accounts of the exploits of persons, both real and imagined, so they may be considered a subcategory of legends. Over time, as each teller embroidered on the hero's abilities or deeds, the tales became outlandishly exaggerated and were valued for their humor and braggadocio than for their factual content. Well-known North American tall tale heroes are Pecos Bill, Paul Bunyan, John Henry, and Johnny Appleseed. Lesser known but equally amazing are such tall tale heroines as Sally Ann Thunder and Whirlwind Crockett. Tall tales can be enjoyed by children aged 7 and up. Fables. The fable is a simple story that incorporates characters, typically animals, whose actions teach a moral lesson or universal truth. Often, the moral is stated at the end of the story. Fables appeal to adults as well as to children, for the best of these stories are both simple and wise. Moreover, their use of animals as symbols for humans have made them safe, yet effective political tools. Perhaps because of their adult appeal, fables were put into print far earlier than other forms of traditional literature. Aesop's fables compose the best-known collection of fables in the Western world, but other collections include the Panchatantra tales from Persia, the Jataka tales from India, and the collected fables of Jean de La Fontaine from France. Folk tales. Folk tales are stories that grew out of the lives and imaginations of people or folk. Folk tales have always been a favorite for children from age 3 and up. Folk tales vary in content as to their original intended audience. Long ago, the nobility and their courtiers heard stories of the heroism, valor, and benevolence of people like themselves, the ruling classes. In contrast, the stories heard by the common people portray the ruling classes as unjust or hard taskmaster whose riches were fair game for those common folk who were quick-witted or strong enough to acquire them. These class-conscious tales are sometimes referred to as castle and cottage tales, respectively. Some people use terms folktale and fairy tale interchangeably. In fact, the majority of these stories have no fairies or magic characters in them, so to use one term in place of the other can be confusing and erroneous. We categorize fairy tales under magic tales, a kind of folktale having magic characters such as fairies. The following is a list of the most prevalent kinds of folktales. Note that some folktales have characteristics of two or more folktale categories. Cumulative. The cumulative tales uses repetition, accumulation, and rhythm to make an entertaining story out of the barest of plots. Because of its simplicity, rhythm, and humor, the cumulative tale has special appeal to 3 to 5 years old. The Gingerbread Man, with its runaway cookie and growing host of pursuers, is a good example of this kind of tale. Humorous. The humorous tale revolves around the characters' incredibly stupid and funny mistakes. These tales are also known as noodleheads, sillies, drolls, and numbskulls. They have endured, no doubt, for their comic appeal and the guaranteed laughter they evoke. Some famous noodleheads are the Norwegian husband who kept house and nearly demolished it, and clever Elsie, who was so addle-brained that she got herself confused with someone else and was never heard from again. Beast. Beast tales feature talking animals and overstated actions. Human characters sometimes occur. Young children accept and enjoy these talking animals, and older children can appreciate that the animals symbolize humans. Goldilocks and the Three Bears is a good example. Magic. Magic tales, also known as wonder tales or fairy tales, contain elements of magic or enchantment in characters, plots, or settings. Fairies, elves, pixies, brownies, witches, magicians, genies, and fairy godparents are pivotal characters in these stories, and they use magic objects or words to weave their enchantments. Talking mirrors, hundred-year naps, glass palaces, enchanted forests, thumb-sized heroines, and magic kisses are the stuff of magic tales, such as Aladdin and the Wonderful Lamp. Pourquoi? Pourquoi tales explain phenomena of nature as in why the sun and the moon lives in the sky. The word pourquoi is French for why, and these tales can be understood as explanation for the many why questions asked by early humans. The strong connection between these tales and myths is obvious, which is why some folklorists identify pourquoi tales as the simplest myths. However, deities play no role in pourquoi tales as they do in myths, and the setting in pourquoi tales is earthly, whereas the setting in myths is the realm of gods. Realistic. Realistic tales are those whose characters, plot, and setting could conceivably have occurred. There is no magic in these tales, and any exaggeration is limited to the possible. Only a few realistic tales exist. Dick Whittington and his cat is a good example. Traditional literature, the wealth of ancient stories accumulated over the course of human existence, is one of the treasures of our species. When listen to these endlessly fascinating stories, we reflect on them and they help to tell us who we are. Good companions of our childhood, they easily become part of us and stay with us throughout our lives. Every child deserves access to this wonderful literary and cultural heritage. Storytelling in the classroom. Given that traditional literature is rooted in oral tradition, telling these stories in classrooms provides an effective, powerful means for engaging children with this literature. Children are attentive listeners when their teachers tell stories and quickly begin telling stories themselves. By bringing stories to life through personal expression and interpretation, storytellers establish a close communication with their audience. Selection of a story. To find stories for telling, read through collections of folktales and short stories until you find a few you especially like. Consider these 2 points. Good stories for telling usually have few characters, from 2 to 5, high conflict, action that builds to a climax, and a quick conclusion that ties together all the threads of the story. Humorous elements are also worth seeking. The first stories you tell should take no longer than 10 minutes. As you develop your storytelling gifts, you may want to tell longer stories. Preparation for telling. Outline the story content in terms of the plot. Many storytellers note the title and source of the tale, the characters' names and story events, and other information that may be helpful on a 3x5 card to consult quickly just before telling a story. Another option is to tape yourself telling stories and use them to refresh your memory for later retellings. Tell the story aloud to yourself again and again. Do not memorize the story, but keep in mind the characters and sequence of main story events. Each time you tell the story, it will change a bit, becoming more and more your own story as you include personal touches. Some storytellers use simple props, a hat, a stick-on mustache, or a stuffed toy, or more elaborate ones, a mask, a puppet, or a costume. You can also tell stories through a felt board, using pictures or objects that are moved around during the story. Digital storytelling connects the age-old art of storytelling with children's digital worlds through the use of computer-based tools. Digital stories can be personal narratives, traditional tales, or historical recountings that are told by combining computer-based images, text, recorded audio narration, video clips, photographs, drawings, and/or music to tell a brief story. And that ends this video on traditional literature. Please do not forget to like and subscribe on this channel.